Erin. Hi, Jade. Hi. So happy to have you guys here. Let's talk about the polarity between control and confident detachment and how that shows up in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's really present for me right now in my journey of motherhood. I'm mothering an 8-year-old little girl whose father is not around these days, and she's really struggling with anxiety. And I was in a therapy session yesterday, and the therapist brought up this element of at this age, it's like a Rudolph Steiner phase or transition in development when a child kind of acknowledges or realizes for the first time that their parents aren't like these perfect godlike beings, and they start to see the reality of who they are, or at least get a little peek, behind the curtain of imperfections. And they also will challenge or make plays to feel more in control of themselves. And it was helpful to have that reflection because I think in her experience of anxiety, it is a feeling of being out of control of your emotions, of your experience, of your expectations, not matching up with your reality. So I'm seeing in her behavior recently that, yeah, she may be desiring to have more autonomy, which is in direct conflict, I would say, to me feeling like it is my responsibility to provide a controlled, consistent environment for her and structure for her to feel safe or as safe as possible. And that shows up in a lot of different ways for me. I mean, the easiest example I can give is like, okay, so I've been raising this child since birth. It's been my responsibility to take care of her space. So she has her own bedroom. It's so adorable, but I walk into that space as if it's my own. And I declutter as I would with my own space. I clean. I will order her around to tell her what she needs to do. And I'm sure that, I can imagine that is uncomfortable. I know I would feel uncomfortable if someone was walking into my personal space and doing that. So this element of detachment comes in. And one thing that I heard about detachment that I really love is, it's about giving people the opportunity to show them that you not only allow, but trust that they can handle something themselves. But it's a whole journey, like
with a child.
Yeah, detaching what something will look like when someone else is doing it differently than you would. Detaching from the outcome, detaching from their experience. So yeah, I think there's a lot there as a mother, but in relationships in general, I see how control shows up all as recovering perfectionist. It shows up all around in all kinds of relationship dynamics.
Yeah, what stood out to me when you said that is the imagery of Marshall, my son, starting to fight back on the way that his room is when he's 2 years old right now. It doesn't matter. But I have a physical reaction in my body to that idea. So I really feel that. That's definitely something for me to think about and start preparing for.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of an interesting metaphor almost for us for motherhood, this whole room, because we curated that space from before they even came earthside. We designed it. We thought about the elements that would go into it. And I have things from my childhood in that room. And I've been doing this for 8 years. Yeah. I mean, it's been an extension of her, but also an extension of me. And now it's time to kind of pull back and witness how she shows up and what she allows her to self-express.
Yeah. Because for me, the foundation of my brand abode and the skill set that I developed early on really was from my childhood room. because I felt very anxious as a child and I felt out of control everywhere outside of my room in my container. And I realized early on, although I didn't know exactly what I was doing, I was cultivating my own safe space and channeling my anxiety through that to feel safe in my room. And that translated into constantly redecorating my room. And then I slowly developed this ability to sort of be an energetic curator through that. And so I really identify with what you're saying with Cora, and can see how that will translate in me as a mother too. Because I've been sat in both seats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I can add some things here. Obviously, I'm not a parent, but I've studied a lot in the trauma space. That's what I do. And a lot of that comes from childhood and our early on views of the world and stories about ourselves and the world around us. And I have two thoughts here to just get the real world experience from you two to see if this translates into the real world for you two. But the way I look at this is that emotions and children, as they become more conscious, they start to express more. They have more diverse expression of emotions, right? So it gets more nuanced. And I think that we're never really taught, parents are never really taught that there's stories behind emotions, right? So when I think of anxiety, the story I think about that is there behind the scenes is the inability to choose or own a choice once it's made. So when I hear this idea of like being able to let a child choose certain things about their room, for example, and that is allaying anxiety. That's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that, well, and by the way, there's a couple others that might be helpful here. Like, for example, depression is the inability to find hope or trust. Frustration is the inability to finish or complete something. Acceptance is or resistance is the inability to accept. Anger is the inability to let go. So when you understand emotions in this way, you'll see where maybe the stories are coming from your kids. Mm-hmm. Second, though, and this might be helpful or not, is I do think that, as parents, you're always going to want to have control over certain aspects of what your children do. There's a protective aspect to that. There's consistency. So for me, I like to think of it in terms of there's borders and sort of guardrails. Maybe think of it as structured flexibility. There's always a strong degree of structure, and when children are younger, that degree of structure is much more hemmed in and tight. And then you become more flexible within that structure as children grow. So, but there's always got to be sort of guardrails there. And I think that's where sometimes, it's tough for parents and, kids, because the structure has to be there, but then there's this loosening of the guardrails, extension of the structure. So I like to think of it in terms of structured flexibility. And I think most parents, I would say, don't understand that this is a natural progression as children grow, to release some of the structure, to give more flexibility, also to look at what emotions they're experiencing and try to think what's the story or coping mechanism that they're trying to allay. So you were talking about this idea of anxiety. To me, that's a story of I am trying to control things that I feel I have no choice over. And so, yes, perhaps it is about giving choice where that's appropriate.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love this example because I definitely see how it can relate to other relationship dynamics, especially when it comes to the flexibility and establishing trust. But to bring it back to like the child parent relationship, I mean, yeah, I'm never going to allow her to paint her room completely black. I will not allow her to have a television in her room. But, remaining flexible, not only as a parent, but just I think as a human being can be very challenging. I think, I look at generations of parents before us, and rigidity was kind of the way. Like what I say fucking goes. Yeah. And there's simplicity in that. And there's stronger boundaries that are more easily defined. Yeah. But, you can walk around being a very rigid person, which I don't connotate as being joyful. Or, and flexibility is something that we have to constantly work at. It's about pushing up against those boundaries and finding, okay, where is that flex? Where can I let go? Where can I detach? my mom always said one of her greatest pieces of parenting advice is like, you know, once you have it figured out with your child, they're going to change it up on you.
100%. I learned that early on for sure.
It starts, you know, you have a newborn baby, you're like, what the hell is going on? And then you figure out how to soothe them, how they want to be held, how they sleep, and then boom, you know, they're in this next sleep regression or this next phase where they start teething, and it's like, okay, here we go again. So there's an opportunity there to remain flexible, to be backed up against a boundary and feel that discomfort and say, okay, where is it that I can give a little bit? Yes. Yeah.
Such a lesson in surrender. I mean, this necklace that I have on basically says surrender in Sanskrit. And being a mother to a wild ass 2-year-old boy has taught me nothing but surrender. And I'm definitely a recovering control freak. And maybe that comes from my childhood. I'm listening to you talk about flexibility and how older generations had such rigidity. And I'm thinking about my childhood, and I don't remember much flexibility at all, other than being able to redecorate my room. But everything was rigid. And I'm now reflecting on all the parts and pieces of my everyday life where I'm continually having to learn this lesson of flexibility, whether it's about being late or managing employees or winter weather delays or, you know, just all the things that are constantly thrown at us as human beings. And oh yeah, surrendering and letting go is the mantra for letting go of control. Because we really have all we have control over is ourselves and our level of flexibility.
I have a question for the two of you as moms, and this is a theory that I have, and it goes along with some of the research that I've been doing myself. But the theory essentially goes like this: is that number one, if you're a mother, right, you cannot be. It's much harder to be objective with your child. So someone who's emotionally objective can come in and essentially go, okay, here's what you need to do, and you might think to yourself, that would be great, except you don't understand. So whenever I hear that would be great, but you don't understand, what I hear is, okay, you're emotionally attached. You can't let go of the emotional, and that makes complete sense. And here's the question, right? So it starts with this idea that you're so emotionally involved, you can't get to this emotionally aware and objective place. But the question is, if you could, and you could hold an emotional standard, and that could be taught. There are ways to do that, which we can talk about if you guys want to think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
But if you could hold that standard of emotional strength and resilience, and I would say call it an emotional standard that you portray, what is happening actually at the level of energetics is we now know that the heart field expands 6 feet off the body, and it is interacting with other people's emotional states. This is research by Hartman. And so the idea would be, if you could hold an emotional standard and the child is doing what they're doing, but you could stay in that emotional state, have the two of you seen that can work? Is it something that you've seen fellow parents try? The theory is it works for the adults. Certainly, if you walk into a room and it's kind of frenetic and certain people come in with an emotional standard, they can change the flavor of the room right away. I'm wondering, is this even possible with children?
Well, I think yes, and maybe, and it translates to relationships too. I feel like in the past when I've come to either of you guys talking about whatever my relational issue is, the answer is always yes, we can move through whatever this conflict if I can stay 100% down-regulated and they can stay in a relational dynamic 100% down-regulated, because then you are much more objective and there is no emotional charge. So in parenting, it's the same thing. Sure, a lot of these things are much more easy to navigate when we can show up in this down-regulated place. You know, for me, as an overstimulated mom, I find that for the most part, I can do that until I start to become fatigued and I start to be poked and prodded and there's loud bangs and there's mess, and eventually there's a building, and then there's like a what the fuck, like what is happening here? This is fucking insane. How can you surrender in chaos forever, constantly, especially if you're a single mom or a single individual and you don't have like a tap out moment to like recharge and reset.
So, two things I want to say about this. One is I say that vulnerability is what is my parenting superpower. My child is at an age where there is a certain level of understanding, and she's seen it all. So, from me in my emotional state. But I feel it's important, and it kind of goes back to generations before us and this rigidity. I feel it's important to make amends with my child when I have done something, I don't want to say wrong, because it's almost like when I'm being human, but to make sure that I acknowledge that I own this. This was not your fault. This is my experience. And if this, if this was scary for you, too much for you, that was not my intention. I am sorry for that. And I think to teach accountability, it's teaching accountability and how to be responsible for our own emotions without, which is also a tricky thing. You did this to me. This is why I feel the way I feel because of what you're doing. It's like, I want to really break that cycle of emotional codependency. I feel like it plays into, but so that's the vulnerability aspect of it. And then to come back to your question more directly, it's interesting because, and also with what Kelly was saying, when you're coming from a place of love, when you're wanting to establish trust, then it's very different. Whereas, and we kind of talked about this with Court, you're like emotionally cutting off and not responding. And I think, you have experience with that too. It's like, if we're coming into this, like, Court can do something, bad, or it can make me upset. But I let her know through my affirmations to her, there is nothing that you can ever do that would make me stop loving you. And then another thing that I do with her, like after a huge emotional breakdown that she had yesterday morning after me being gone for a few days, is like the story that starts playing in her head is, I'm bad. I'm not a good kid. And I have her put her hands on her heart and close her eyes and say, even when I make mistakes, I'm still good. I am loved, I'm loving, and I'm lovable. And I show her that in how I show up. And because, listen, I have the same tape and I have to rewire it as well. I make mistakes all the time, especially emotionally. And when you're dealing with the emotional fragility of a child, it's like, you got to take responsibility. So, but it's very, it's easy to cast blame or to be, I'm so fucking overstimulated, I can't handle this, and to like push away versus I take responsibility for my experience. You are a part of that, but I'm here to establish trust and come from a place of love, where it's like, in that there's room for it all and we're all going to be safe.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I would be wondering about is, from my perspective, the love message comes from a consistent way of being over time. And it does not necessarily come from the individual moments, right? So from my perspective, I would say something like, first, I don't know that we emotionally ever cut off someone. I think what we do is we go, I am going to now gather my emotional resources. And we can even use language like that with people and kids, right? It's like, I've had enough. I need to gather my emotional resources now. And I'm not, available, for this in a sense, right? But we feel that I'm not available for this in a sense. And, now you feel like the child is left. I guess my thought is that as soon as you essentially say, I'm taking care of me right now, and I'm going to come back and be like, and by the way, later the next morning or whatever, I love and adore you. It's that message that allows someone to say, oh, I can mess up and it's always going to be okay. So I wonder about that. And I'll give you an example of this about what I mean about being as objectively emotionally detached as possible. Don't ask me why my brother did this, but when I was 24, my brother left me with a 6-month-old and a 7-year-old adopted child for what was 7 to 10 days. Okay?
Wow.
At 24, and I had never taken care of an infant. So long story short, of course, I'm not objectively emotionally as attached as he is.
Right.
So the 7-year-old had just come from Russia, and right away she's like leaving messes all over the place. I want to eat, and just absolutely, I'm just like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
And what I said to her was, clean up your mess, we'll go eat. Now, granted, this is 7 days or 10 days or whatever it was. To me, it felt like a lifetime. Of course, she didn't listen to what I said and yelled and screamed and because I was objectively detached from her and there was a different emotional energy for her, she was playing the game that she played with my brother Chemo. Running around, and I'm just like, sorry, clean your mess, and I will take you to eat. Now, because also I was 24, I was like, eventually she's going to get hungry, right? So a parent's going to go, I got to feed my kid. So I think that first day she didn't eat because I was just like, clean up your mess and you'll eat. And in my head, I'm thinking, this is going to be 10 days of hell if I don't
That's
do
when you
this.
start negotiating with a terrorist.
Right. So by the middle of the second day, she's like, I want to eat. And I'm like, I know. And I want to feed you. I need help clean up your messes. And if you can clean up your mess, this, and this, we'll go eat.
Yeah.
Finally, she cleaned up her mess and we went to eat. And it was just sticking to my guns for that amount of time. But also, I'm like telling a parent this who's emotionally attached. I was emotionally detached. I was just like, to me, it was kind of like dealing with my dog, Stoey. It was no different. It was basically like, you don't get to bed, and I don't care how much you jump on my leg or wiggle or whatever, you don't get to bed.
Basic training.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, for people who don't have kids like me, hearing something like this from someone like me must be absolutely, you must be enraged in a sense to be like, how do you possibly, because you're in a whole big situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal, right? To have it all clear cut, very by the book, like you can see it. And it is kind of like the whole oxygen mask, it's like, I have to take care of myself. I have to maintain my boundaries in order to show up for you. And yeah, in an ideal world, we would be very clear. I remember watching my brother raise his 3 girls, and I could see very clearly, like, Sean, you asked them to do something and they didn't do it. So now you have to give them a choice or options like you did. If you don't do this, then you don't eat, right? And then you have to stick to that. You have to stick to that boundary.
It seems like it would be impossible if you're emotionally attached.
Well, I mean, you take care of the child since birth, right? So for the first year and a half of their life, there's no vocabulary. So you're just going by their whims and whimpers and cries, and it's your job to keep them alive. So it's like, how do we grow out of that and teach our child communication skills and teach them boundaries and teach them respect, and like, it's just, there's a lot of different elements here. And like, my current example, she's 8 years old. She's a great communicator, but I have this emotional component where I'm completely aware that her main source of safety and security is now gone. So I'm trying to overcompensate, right? So in that storm, it's like, how do I maintain my boundaries? How do I maintain, this level of respect? How do I not fall victim to her vying for control via emotional manipulation, and take care of myself in the process so I can see these other things? So there's just so many components to it. And it's, we all fall into patterning. We all fall into routine. We all just like want things to be easy. So here's a screen.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that comes up for me, because I have a younger child, is, I very much take your approach, Jade, and I've raised dogs, my entire adult life. So I can see the basic reward, boundary, reward, response, training. But for me, the major challenge that I've experienced as a mother is my biological predisposition for like what happens in my body when I hear my child cry.
Mm.
If I didn't have that response, it would be so much easier. And of course, we have that for a reason, and we especially have that when we have younger children. But I am predisposed to respond to a cry. Just hearing I had a friend here this past weekend, and hearing her young 2-month-old cry, it is so triggering, and I just want to respond and I want to soothe. And so I think that's really difficult for mothers. I don't know, I can't speak to fathers and what their physiological response is when they hear a child cry. But yeah, there's an emotional detachment there to be able to stay fully engaged in the structure for their own benefit when they get older.
Yeah, I think if we were to look at that from like a spiritual angle,
Yeah.
as far as, just daily life overstimulation. I mean, what have you learned about yourself, or are there any tools that you have for like, acknowledging your experience in the moment and how to detach?
Well, I mean, from a spiritual journey standpoint, detachment is everything. It's detaching from the result of anything that we experience, and also just detaching emotionally. So, I mean, I do a lot of hot yoga, and one of the things they talk about regularly, it's not even really the spiritual aspect, but it's learning how to regulate in such an intense environment, which is 110 degrees, extreme physical exercise, learning to breathe through it. Just on a basic level, how we're teaching our nervous systems to respond, saying sauna, cold plunge. I know my reduction in anxiety was quite significant when I learned how to navigate those extreme environments and the contrast between them.
Mm-hmm.
I even began clocking it from a data standpoint, moving my heart rate up and down. So outside of spirituality, I think there's an exercising and just putting yourself through those circumstances and learning how to basically run those laps. And then from a spiritual standpoint, for me, that works everywhere in my life. But the motherhood piece and the chaos of the toddler, I haven't mastered that. Detaching from his response, from what he might be, what he will become, and surrendering. And I'm very much still learning how to surrender and let go of an end result in relation to him, because I do feel very responsible.
Let me ask you, with you going through a transition in your relationship and mothering, and I know we've talked, and Marshall had some new school situations this year, and then now has 2 separate households. Do you recognize how that shows up in his behavior, and how you manage or show up?
I do recognize that. I mean, for me, it's more around the detaching to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
From how his father does things. That is different. When I used to be in control of everything, that was his structure, his upbringing, his food, and his scheduling, his sleep, everything related to school. Now, clothing. These are all basic needs. And now I don't have that level of control, and all I have is my container. And I'm getting close to mastering that skill. It's been really nice for me to have the time off and the self-care so that I can continue to down-regulate and let go and surrender in that. So finding space for nourishment, I find is really beneficial in my capacity to surrender and let go and detach from whatever the results are that I don't have control over, and just owning what's mine and what I can do on my time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, from a spiritual standpoint, I guess just trusting the soul journey, recognizing that even whatever happens for my son, say from an attachment standpoint, or whatever triggers he lives through or wounding in his life experience, it's perfectly within his soul destiny. It's what his soul came to learn here in this lifetime.
Absolutely.
And that's not mine.
One of the most helpful things that I've learned in a 12-step recovery program is that I have my own higher power and you have your own higher power, and it is not me. So I feel like it's a different way of saying that, but I find it to be super helpful. And there's many different ways to say, you know, the divine is working through you in its own way. And that's where surrender really connects for me.
Yeah.
Is like, because I'm turning it over to a power that's so much greater than me.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to do is like trust in that.
Yeah, and sitting on the other side, you know, being in adulthood versus looking back over my childhood, I am at a place where, sure, I had anxiety and I had these struggles and I lived in this rigid environment. But I can see now, looking back over my life, that this was 100%, like, I'm grateful for all the struggle. It's taught me the lessons that I've needed to get to the place where I'm at now, spiritually and emotionally. And so being able to take that perspective and look at our children and know that they will, there's surrendering and they will get to that place or not. And
yeah,
not, that's a part of their destiny in this life.
Yeah, and one of the things mantras that I use with Cora all the time is from the great Brene Brown is, you can do hard things.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's important for us to realize that, but it's not our job to make our children's life easy.
Yeah.
I mean, they're making their own choices and having their own experience. Like, yes, we're there to provide love and structure and create trust, but like, we have to prepare them for what life really is. And life is not easy.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that parents get really tripped up on. It's like, oh, it's my job to do everything and make everything okay. I mean, you hit on the point, like I find that as a mother, I'm taking care of all of your basic needs, right? And I think emotions are certainly emotional connection, emotional expression. That's a basic need, definitely. But it's on top of everything else I'm doing, it's extremely overwhelming. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to maintain my emotional health.
And that's what a lot of mothers end up doing is basic needs for the child and then not maintaining their own basic needs like food, sleep.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a natural process in child development. Like I think people don't understand. Like, if you look at research on kids who are given everything and the parents are constantly there emotionally, those children end up as psychopaths. They do not know. No, like they legitimately actually do. So it's one of these things that I imagine the struggle is as children move through. The way I see it is 0 to 10 years old, right? It happens around 6, but it's different for different people. These are safety and security needs are being programmed into this child.
Yeah.
Then 10 to 20, roughly, is acceptance and belonging needs. And you talked about this transition from, with your child, this transition from, okay, safety and security needs, and now understanding that mom isn't just an extension of me. She has her own needs, and I have my own needs. As she starts to figure that out, there is this place where there's some direction that needs to be there. And I think there's an emotional component, and then there's an explaining logical component. Hey, just so you understand, mom needs to take some time for herself. You also need to do the same thing. That's what this disconnect is about, versus perhaps being like, oh, I have to be the emotional support system always, and that's even a good thing. How does a child become resilient if they don't ever get to have their emotional response? And I do think when you take a child's complete control away, putting them in like what we might say prison conditions,
right?
These are the things that are problematic. That's why they say, you know, like with timeouts and things like that, it's like this brief time that you are out of control a little bit, but oftentimes there's some control, you know, sort of within that. So a lot of stuff that happens in child development is like with children who won't go to bed on time, right? It's like they'll play games with, it's like if you get one, you know, token to get out of bed one time per night, if you want to use that based on good behaviors in other places. And it is kind of like training a dog in that regard. But
Yeah.
from my perspective, just giving someone free range emotionally and always being there does not allow them to learn resilience. And no parent would want that. So there does become a tough love type of place that is inserted right around the ages of between 6 and 11 or so. And I think that transition is hard for parents when it's like, okay, there's a tough love thing that has to happen here. And I do think I keep the safety and security. I love you. You're unconditional love. And there are consequences based on these things to me always being the emotional support system. I can't imagine how tough it is. I've only ever watched it or coached parents who are interested in child development, but doing it myself, I don't think I could ever have the patience to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I acknowledge that I'm alone, I have or can be coming from a place of like insecurity, right? Like overcompensating because I'm the only parent in the picture, or I'll say the only emotionally mature parent in the picture. But I think when I am able to detach from that idea and acknowledge and accept and love myself for doing the best I can and just showing up as human, I can see, what's most important for me is to teach my child like emotional autonomy and how to self-soothe. And it's actually not me who is in control or responsible for providing control. She's in control of her own experience. I think that's incredibly important. So in this therapy session that I had yesterday, one of the things we talked about is, so I work from home and my office is off of my living room, and oftentimes Cora is downstairs in the living room watching TV while I'm working, so I can actually work. But she'll often come in and do, need some.
It's like bid for connection.
So it's like hugging and kissing is what she needs. And I've established with her that I'm always there to provide affection, but when I'm working or on a call, I'm not available for that. And so one of the things we talked about with the therapist was I'm going to be creating a list, just a few things that I'll place on the wall in the living room that she can do if she's needing affection or attention or connection. And, basically with the instruction of like how to cultivate that within her own experience. So she's not always requiring me to provide that. Although I will always be there for her and I'm more of that container, she, giving her some direct tools that she can start to create that for herself. So I'm excited about that.
By the way, I will say this too, in terms of just this is across the board for us adults as well, but for children. One of the things that's really interesting, the research on compassion and compassionate self-talk, is so we talk a lot about things like biohacking, where it's like, use contrast hydrotherapy or breath work. Do you know that the most soothing thing that we can do for ourselves as humans is compassionate self-talk? It raises oxytocin, it lowers cortisol levels, it decreases adrenaline, it allows us to regulate, and yet we're never taught that.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we can completely ever take away the stress that we're going to undergo when the child is going to go. But I think I'm just struck by the fact that that's essentially what you're modeling is this compassionate self-talk. Like if I could go back and give myself one skill that I could grow up with, it would be to learn to talk compassionate to myself. At 50, I can still be incredibly harsh in my internal narrative.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing to me that so many people, the vast majority of people, go through their whole lives never actually learning how to speak kindly to themselves and self-regulate in that way, which is why they have difficulty accepting, compliments from other people. Just the fact that I think you're doing that, like that would be, if I could go back and be like, I want one gift from my childhood.
Yeah.
It would be teach me how to speak compassionately. By the way, my mom loved me unconditionally.
Yeah.
She's a little emotionally volatile, but she loved me. But I never learned, none of my family members learned.
Yeah.
Passionate self-talk.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the biggest breakthroughs in my own development journey was around when I became a mother. When my therapist would ask me to talk to my inner critic, to talk to my inner child, what does she want to hear? How does she want to be soothed? I just would always, years ago, draw a blank, and I had no nothing to pull from as far as language of how do I soothe this child. What is a 7-year-old girl? How old is she? A 4-year-old girl? What does she want to hear? But then when I became a mother and I experienced that love and being emotionally available for my son, I then learned the language to communicate with my own inner child and mother myself in this way that I never had access to before because it wasn't what I experienced as a kid.
Absolutely.
So I think it's while we have some challenges, as many challenges as mothers, and some predisposition that make it harder, we also have access to things like that, which really help us learn to navigate our own inner child and positive self-talk.
And I'll tell you something interesting when you're working with people. Like one of the things I do now is I put people in altered states of consciousness through breath work.
Yeah.
And I help them dimensionalize their experiences and dialogue with themselves.
Yeah.
And if I have someone in an alternative conscious state, of a woman or a man, and I say to the guy, "You're such a good boy. You're doing so good," without a doubt,
Yeah.
that guy will begin to break down. And the same thing, we will begin to have an emotional response. Same thing with a woman. If I say, "You're such a good girl, you're doing so good, you did so well, you tried so hard," they will immediately, and if you can, even when I say that, right, you can feel it within yourself, which means there's something deeply sort of embedded in us that somewhere along the way we picked up this thing. I'm not good enough. I'm not being a good boy or a good girl. I am not deserving of love in this way. And this seems to me, I have yet to deal with someone who's dealing with psychological patterns and dysfunctions in their lives, where I don't put them in an alternate state of consciousness and prompt them to dialogue with their inner child, and that this does not cause an immediate reaction. And of course, the medicine is absolutely you need to father and parent yourself, and because this is what we require at the deepest level. Our safety security needs, on some level, most of us growing up, were not fully solidified. I also would say that they're not meant to be. You two were talking about this, is that part of the human condition is such that you're not meant to have complete safety security. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in human school.
Yeah.
You're not meant to be completely free and accepted and belonging. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in human school.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been challenging. I noticed with Cora, probably from the age of like 3 or 4, there would be this self-talk that was like, or a constant like, "Do you love me?" And I was like, "We're so affectionate to you. We give you praise." And so it's been interesting as a parent to witness that insecurity when I really truly feel like, yeah, I'm not perfect, but there's so much positive affirmation and so much love surrounding her. And so, yeah, it's really interesting that there's almost this like ingraining of that. But also as a parent, like we were saying, like it is our job to prepare you for the world. And I think we, knowing that we all have listened to that messaging or have that messaging at some point in time, there's an opportunity to rework it. I think one other thing that I wanted to share along the lines of the inner parent or the inner child self, parenting yourself, was when, and I feel like we're kind of past this phase now, but there really is no love like the love you receive from your child. It's very, very powerful. And in my experience, it's the first time that I felt like I said earlier, she's seen all sides of me, the worst of me. And it's very different than in like a romantic relationship or with my parents. Like there's almost ways to hide. I feel like in parenting, I cannot hide. And I cannot manipulate. I cannot make you see me any other way than is out there. And she still loves me so fucking much. And she's never like, "You're bad," or "I'm walking away." It's just like, "I love you, mama." And that has really been so powerful.
Yeah. I think the two of you will vibe with this. I know you will vibe with this, but I think it's a good point to sort of say this. I think that when you are everything in life, right? We talk about this a lot, the three of us, is a mirror to your own sort of spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And what I also feel like I've seen and can regard it as a universal truth is that when you are in conflict with anyone or there's struggles around and it's bringing up stuff in you, the right response, the first response is to essentially go, when I clear this within me, it'll clear within them.
Yeah.
And I really do believe that's a universal truth. And so then I wondered with what you're talking about there, my mother used to say the same thing. She goes, you're the ones who taught me unconditional love. Not because I was unconditionally loving you all, but because you all, her children, were unconditionally loving her.
Yeah.
She never had that model to her.
Yeah.
And then now as an older adult, I think to myself, yeah, and ultimately that was about a reminder for you to square that within your own energetics.
Absolutely.
And I wonder in the things that I want to study, in the work that I do in psychology, I want to study this idea of when you are in that space and clearing those emotional wounds within you. And now we're starting to learn how this emotional energetic permeates the people you're around. Would that in itself, this is theoretical, just like, would that in itself begin to get your child to adjust? Like, is that possible? It's just, it fascinates me. Like, if you were completely like, I'm just going to regard myself, my inner critic, with compassionate self-love, and I want to make that my work, would all of a sudden you see that in your child begin to energetically shift?
That's why I say she's my greatest teacher.
Yeah.
The messaging that I received as a child was I was difficult. I was, basically I was a challenge. And so I see this as, in raising my daughter, an opportunity like to not continue that narrative, to have a different story. And, the affirmation that I gave her, the mantra that I gave her when she was so young, when I was hearing this negative self-talk, I am loved, I'm loving, and I am lovable. Because I was told I was a difficult child as an adult, I realized, well, that translated as I am hard to love or I am not lovable. And that's just not true. So here's my opportunity to reprogram not only my subconscious, but my daughter's as well.
I love that thought so much.
Yeah, I could pass it down, same thing. But I know it's not true. It never was. It was just how I received it.
Unfortunately for us humans, what we logically know is true does not matter as much as what we think is true in the subconscious, which is why I have some complaints around therapy and stuff like that, which to me is very process-oriented. It rarely gets to the unconscious. But what you believe is true really is coming from the unconscious, and that's oftentimes what needs to change. But I love that whole thought.
I want to hear more about your experience, Jade, as a kid and how you feel like that's impacted your emotional state with what you've shared with us in the past of having an emotionally volatile mom. Like as far as the structures and detachment, how has that shown up in your perspective of child rearing and motherhood?
It's permeating my whole life, right? And so this is the interesting thing. It has defined my entire life. I learned not to trust female emotions, and yet I learned to be highly attuned to female emotions and also be, really learn to be a very good boy. So in my life in general, no surprise, I've worked with almost entirely women my whole career. Female endocrinology, female emotions, all of that stuff, and became very adept at it. However, being a people pleaser in that way, it made me, and also there was another component to my childhood. I was bullied by my older brother. And so that was almost like a worthiness issue. And so I learned not to ask. And those things followed me around in my life. And that's why I call them misguided unconscious decisions or MUD. They're misguided because you don't have the maturity, know-how, wisdom to understand how to deal with an emotionally volatile mother or why you're being bullied by your brother. It's unconscious because it follows you around like a shadow. And here's the part that no one really wants to admit. It's a decision because whether you're aware of it or not, even at those young ages, we made a choice to see the world a particular way. So I chose to see, oh, I'm not worthy, that's why my brother's beating me up. Oh, I'm not a good boy, that's why my mom freaks out all the time. And that's not my brother's fault or my mom's fault necessarily. And by the way, I think that's the first stage of healing, to be like, that's not their fault. That was their own pattern, right? So that first part to go, I have to release them and essentially go, what is this about? And by the way, the final thing I'll say here is that for me, and what I see in all the patients I work with now, is that programming was exactly what I needed to get the lessons I didn't know I needed to get to the place I didn't know I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And that speaks to what you were saying. So it's like there was these lessons I didn't know I needed. And there was this place I didn't know I wanted to go. That all that trauma and trials and tribulations and difficulty got me to.
I've done your soul destiny chart. I know exactly. It's all perfectly going to like me.
Well, I remember when you handed me that.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, I'm like thinking, what is this woo-woo stuff? It's so grateful for it. And I'm looking at it like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and by the way, that's one of the nicest things anyone's ever done for me. To spend the time
Yeah.
with me like that. And by the way, it was difficult to receive. Like, you've always been someone, you know, that is easy to receive from.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the perspective on the soul destiny, and the argument I would make for you is that actually you did know that you needed these lessons on a soul level and chose this scenario with these siblings and this mother and this father. We all did, including Cora, including Marshall. We just don't have a way to access it in this hologram right now. But when, like you talk about in your book, You've Grown Me, when that hologram's over, we're going to take a step back and say, okay, now what did I not learn? What do I need to learn? And then I'm going to choose my next lifetime.
I'm saying, you know, that my mother, this is another interesting thing. My mother, since the time I was born, told me that.
Really?
You know, you chose me, and like all. So I had all this really interesting stuff. And she even said, you know, during your time, you know, my mom was a complete hippie, so we shared it.
Yeah.
My mom was like, during your time, it's going to be a spiritual awakening, and you're going to be part of this. So all the way back in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I asked her, now, where did you get this stuff? She was, I don't know, it must have been something I was reading or into.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating.
Yeah. My mother always said to me, in this lifetime, we're mother and daughter, but we have been together many lifetimes.
I love this. This idea fascinates me the most, because what I've seen with my patients and clients and the work I do now, that it's uncanny. Mm-hmm. It's uncanny that exactly what, and when I train my coaches, there's 3 principles I teach them. I go, number 1, everybody is a unique spiritual fingerprint. So we're all unique, and they're all worthy based on that. Number 2, as such, it means they have a unique work that they can do that no one else can do in the way they can do it. And the third part is the hard one to grasp. And the third part is, and everything that is happening to and has happened to you is the material required to help you do.
Yeah.
You know that you and I believe the same thing, and I have come to believe that in my own life experience as I've seen the wildest and craziest set of circumstances that I could have never fucking imagined perfectly aligned for what was so clearly in flow and what was in alignment with what I needed in this lifetime. Yeah.
I think that's a whole show.
And that is, the answer to surrender. Like when we take the spiritual approach and we look at these challenges that we face as mothers and fathers and humans, that is how we surrender, is by maintaining that perspective. And it's funny, like, to go back to your mother saying that you chose her.
Yeah.
When I was trying to get pregnant, this is kind of something silly that I'm witnessing that due in my own experience of being Marshall's mother. I was 100% what I felt like on a spiritual level and a meditative level, advertising myself to souls, like, hey, like, sort of doing this male peacock dance, like, this is what your life could look like, and this is what your father's like, and this is what I'm like, really cool, and we can travel, and we can rock climb, and come into me, come into this life. And I seriously sometimes in my deep, deep thoughts might even judge and criticize myself and my own inner critic, because I feel like I'm not giving him what a 2-year-old, this exotic travel and rock climbing and this wild, big pleasure-seeking life. I'm letting him down on a soul level, which really I can take that back another layer and say, actually, here, he was in a much clearer place of consciousness, or lack thereof, and chose exactly the circumstances as they are.
Yeah. And what I would say that's interesting about your situation, if I look what you would be creating, especially knowing your situation with your child's husband, right? He is all of that. He is very interesting and outdoorsy and action oriented and all that stuff. And you are also very internal and very cerebral and very so there's an outward journey that you've cultivated with his life, and there's a very inward. So if we had to guess, right, I would say this is going to be someone who is very adept at being outward in the world with experiences, but also very adept at going inward into the world and experiences.
Yeah.
And that's rare because most people are outward oriented. They never do the inward work. I think the inward work is the scariest work. It's the most adventurous place. A lot of people would say, maybe I'm boring in this regard because most of my life is a very inward journey. I travel inward with creative things, inward with writing, inward with thinking, inward with meditation, inward with plant medicines, but not a whole lot of outward. So it's going to be interesting that you've cultivated that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, I've run in the pattern app, plug the pattern app here. You can bring the sponsorships. So I get a free membership. And Marshall and I have really great energetics between us. So I'm really excited to see what that looks like down the road.
Yeah. Just so people don't know if you don't know what the pattern app is, it's an app that Kelly introduced me to that basically gives you sort of your astrological soul sort of
journey. It's your astrological chart, and then you can compare that chart, and basically based off of the algorithm gives you all the data about your how your compatibility, how well you work, where there are challenges, and essentially your personality type. And Jade isn't necessarily an astrology guy, but I'm constantly making the argument that, see, this is exactly what we already knew and we were talking about from a scientific standpoint. But here it is, just in another language.
Yes, definitely.
And I've needed that reminder. I've needed people to pull me back into my intuitive side. Because when I was younger in my 20s, I was all into this work and I abandoned it for science for a long time.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see myself coming back to it, and as soon as I started coming back to it, I got people in my life who are like, "Hey, don't forget this space over here."
Somewhere in the middle. I've done that too in my own journey, even it's health and wellness, spirituality. I swung to all the extremes, but it's all in the middle is where the answers are.
Well, we're all just trying to make sense of it, right?
Yeah.
And
slowly but surely trying to cling to truth and whatever that is.
But I love that, it's all unfolding as it should, because I think a lot of times we get caught up in our circumstances, and I find it extremely fascinating. I totally believe our children chose us. I feel like I chose my parents, and it's interesting in my own soul's journey. I was divorced at the same age my mom was when she got divorced. Now I'm a single mom. So there's patterns that repeat themselves in order, I think, to receive a different perspective, to further heal, to continue the healing journey of the generation before you had started. So, I really love that trusting and the surrender that, there's divine in it all for us.
Yeah.
I love it. That's a great place to end. It's a really nice thought.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Hard to remember sometimes.